Invocation to the Supreme God, to the Great Divine Father and the Great Divine Mother. Thank you for your priceless blessings, for your divine light, divine love, divine power, divine healing, guidance, mercy, help, and protection. Thank you. To our great spiritual teacher, to all the great spiritual teachers, to all the great gods and goddesses, to all the great, great ones, we very, very humbly thank you for your great blessings. We thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, 1 second. Let's start. Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I think we were on page number 80 or where the word Tarak was there. Tarak. Taraknath, yeah, Tarak. Page number 17 or 80, sorry. Right. Taraknath. So we were still discussing about many, many disciples of early disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. That's the portion which is going on. One of them is Taraknath. Tarak. Others destined to be monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna came to Dakshineshwar. Taraknath Ghoshal had felt from his boyhood the noble desire to realize God. Keshav का मतलब केशव चंद्र सेन. Keshav and the Brahma Samaj had attracted him but proved inadequate. In 1882, he first met the master at Ramachandra's house and was astonished to hear him talk about samadhi, a subject which always fascinated his mind. And that evening, he actually saw a manifestation of that superconscious state in the master. Tarak became a frequent visitor at Dakshineshwar and received the master's grace in abundance. The young boy often felt ecstatic fervor in meditation. He also wept profusely while meditating on God. Sri Ramakrishna said to him, God favors those who can weep for him, shed tears for God, wash away the sins of former birth, which means that God favors those who can weep for him, tears shed for God, wash away the sins of former births. That's interesting, actually. Very, very interesting. Baburam. Baburam Ghosh came to Dakshineshwar accompanied by Rahal, his classmate. Rahal. The master was often his custom, examined the boy's physiognomy, was satisfied about his latent spirituality. At the age of 8, Baburam had thought of leading a life of renunciation in the company of a monk in a hut shut out from the public view by a thick wall of trees. The very sight of Panchavati awakened in his heart that dream of boyhood. Baburam was tender in body and soul. The master used to say that he was pure to his very bones. One day, Hazra, in his usual mischievous fashion, advised Baburam and some of the other young boys to ask Sri Ramakrishna for some spiritual powers and not waste their life in mere gaiety and merriment. The master, scenting mischief, called Baburam to his side and said, What can you ask of me? Isn't everything I have already yours? Yes, everything I have earned in the shape of realizations is for the sake of all of you. So get rid of the idea of begging, which alienates by creating a distance. Rather, realize your kinship with me and gain the key to all the treasures. Wow. See, A very beautiful thing इसमें ये बोला गया है कि get rid of the idea of begging which alienates by creating a distance. Rather realize your kinship with me and gain the key to all the treasures. Wow, wow. It's actually good. Niranjan. Nitya Niranjan Sen was a disciple of heroic type. He came to the master when he was 18 years old. He was a medium for a group of spiritualists. During medium, well, I think it means the mediumship wala medium, कि जिसमें आत्मा आती है. For example, medium is one of those kind of people जिसमें कि some other astral being can come and manifest. जिसको बोलते हैं कि उसके अंदर भूत आता है, फिर वो ऐसा ऐसा हो जाता है. That's medium, right? Mediumship. He was a medium for a group of spiritualists. During his first visit, the master said to him, "My boy, if you think always of ghosts, you will become a ghost. And if you think of God, you will become God. Now, which do you prefer?" Niranjan severed all connections with the spiritualists. During his second visit, the master embraced him and said warmly, "Niranjan, my boy, the days are flitting away. When will you realize God? This life will be in vain if you do not realize Him. When will you devote your mind wholly to God?" Niranjan was surprised to see the master's great anxiety for his spiritual welfare. He was a young man endowed with unusual spiritual parts. He felt disdain for worldly pleasures and was totally guileless, like a child. But he had violent temper. One day, as he was coming in a country boat to Dakshineshwar, some of his fellow passengers began to speak ill of Master. Finding his protest futile, the engine began to rock the boat, threatening to sink it in midstream. That silenced the offenders. When he reported the incident to Master, he was rebuked for his inability to curb his anger. Wow, it's a good example, by the way. See, any great teacher, no, will not want the students or the disciples to get angry or feel angry or stay angry. That is not the purpose, obviously. So they all would want the disciples to be very well in control of their emotional state because that's when they're useful to the teacher. If you're angry and if you're under the control of the emotion, you're not very useful to the teacher. And that is the sad part also. Let's go forward. Jogendra. Jogendranath, on the other hand, was gentle to a fault. One day, under circumstances very like those that had evoked Niranjan's anger, he curbed his temper and held his peace instead of threatening Sri Ramakrishna's abusers. The master, learning of this conduct, scolded him roundly. Thus, to each the fault of the other was recommended as a virtue. Which basically means to Jogendranath, Master said ki you should have done something instead of only keeping quiet. There are different kinds of people, and Sri Ramakrishna tells them differently. The master, learning of his conduct, scolded him roundly. Thus, to each, the fault of the others was recommended as a virtue. See, the Guru was striving to develop in the first instance composure and in the second nettle. Like this is amazing word, yeah. मतलब strength also and composure also. Calmness, but a strong calmness. Calmness with strength. The secret of his training was to build up by a tactful recognition of the requirements of each given case, the character of the devotee. Jogendranath came of an aristocratic Brahmin family of Dakshineshwar. His father and relatives shared the popular mistrust of Sri Ramakrishna's sanity. At a very early age, The boy developed religious tendencies, spending 2 or 3 hours daily in meditation. And his meeting with Sri Ramakrishna deepened his desire for the realization of God. He had a perfect horror of marriage, but at the earnest request of his mother, he had to yield, which means he had to get married. And he now believed that his spiritual future was doomed. So he kept himself away from the master. Sri Ramakrishna employed a ruse to bring Jogendra to him. As soon as the disciple entered the room, the master rushed forward to meet the young man. Catching hold of the disciple's hand, he said, "What if you have married? Haven't I too married? What is there to be afraid of in that?" Touching his own chest, he said, "If this," meaning himself, "is propitious, then even 100,000 marriages cannot injure you. If you desire to lead a householder's life, then bring your wife here one day, and I shall see that she becomes a real companion in your spiritual progress. But if you want to lead a monastic life, then I shall eat up your attachment to the world." Jogan was dumbfounded at these words. He received new strength, and his spirit of renunciation was re-established. Shashi and Sarat. Shashi and Sarat were two cousins who came from a pious Brahmin family of Calcutta. At an early age, they had joined the Brahmo Samaj and had come under the influence of Keshav Sen. The master said to them at their first meeting, "If bricks and tiles are burnt after the trademark has been stamped on them, they retain the mark forever. Similarly, man should be stamped with God before entering the world. Then he will not become attached to worldliness." Fully aware of the future course of their life, he asked them not to marry. The master asked Shashi whether he believed in God with form or without form. Shashi replied that he was not even sure about the existence of God, so he could not speak one way or other. The frank answer very much pleased the master. Sarat's soul longed for the all embracing realization of Godhead. When the master inquired whether there was any particular form of God he wished to see, the boy replied that he would like to see God in the all living beings in the world. But the master demurred, that is the last word in realization. One cannot have it all at the very beginning or the very outset. Sarat stated calmly, "I won't be satisfied with anything short of that. I shall trudge on along the path until I attain that blessed state." Sri Ramakrishna was very pleased. See, by the way, I'm hoping you guys have also been noticing that many of the people who came to Sri Ramakrishna, they have been in the Brahmo Samaj under the influence of Keshav Chandra Sen, right? Now, Keshav Chandra Sen is one of the great leaders, very, very good speakers, by the way, and a person who can give excellent intellectual references. Some of the people in pranic healing are exactly like that, very knowledgeable. They have excellent scriptural exactness also. Their understanding is also pretty solid. But the level of realization is actually lacking, of the true self is actually lacking. However, there are some people I've seen in pranic healing community, they have realized themselves to some degree, whatever degree is possible, and their explanations are very simple, but the energy with which it comes penetrates much more deeply than people who have just read, and read. For example, there is somebody very recently in the retreat I met who was, I think we were talking for some time in between the tea break or something, and I was asking him a couple of questions, and he mentioned that um, what did he mention? We were talking something along the lines of soul and something else, and something along those lines. And along came one of the really good answers, which I consider is that. By the way, that is personal to me. I can't tell this to you openly, publicly. But he did say something which was very apt for the kind of question which I asked him, and um, it somehow didn't show intellectuality. It's because the depth of or the potency of his answers straight went deep inside. That probably, my guess is probably came from a certain level of realization of oneself, which is hard to come by otherwise. So this is something which I'll advise to you, every one of you also. In your free time, do some form of chanting, do some form of meditation. Inner reflection is best, honestly, because once the vice is removed, that much of soul connection is developed. So that and studying, by the way, really helps. Spiritual books, studying of spiritual books, Master Choice says that the Shakti goes to you when you read spiritual books. The Shakti imbibed in the book goes to you. That's amazing. Harinath. Harinath had led the austere life of a brahmachari even from his early boyhood, bathing in the Ganges every day, cooking his own meals, waking before sunrise, and reciting the Gita from memory before leaving the bed. He found in the master the embodiment of the Vedanta scriptures. Aspiring to be a follower of the ascetic Shankara, he cherished a great hatred for women. See, yesterday I was talking to you guys about this particular book called The Practice of Brahmacharya by Swami Shivananda. Swami Shivananda, by the way, in this book very clearly says that women are a gateway to hell. Um, Women are gateway to hell. Somewhere it's written. Somewhere it's written. Interesting. My point is, I'm not able to find it right now, and it's not important also. Point is that this is sorry, I'm unable to find it, but it's written many, many times inside this book. Many, many times, by the way, that women are a gateway to hell. By the way, I should clarify this very, very clearly that the great teacher, Swami Shivananda, tells it to only those people who are about to start their spiritual journey, not people who are spiritually mature. Later on, he clarifies this, saying that it is not, I mean, all the women are like mothers and sisters. I don't treat them as anything like this. But in your mind, if you've been too attracted to women all your life, you have to sometimes cultivate a counter thought form to overcome the urge of interacting and having sex. Sometimes the urge is counteracted by creating a very strong thought form of against. That's what he's trying to say, basically. But later on, he clarifies saying that it is not for mature disciples, it's for people who are starting out on the path. So, anyways, my point is the brahmacharya. Um, See, this is why he says ki, hatred for women, aspiring to be a follower of the ascetic Shankara, he cherished a great hatred for women. That's not the path because there is a very beautiful word in this book called Urdh Vareta. Urdh Vareta. Urdh Vareta. Urdh Vareta, I think if I'm not wrong, he says that Urdh Vareta is the one who has successfully started the flow of a specific sex energy uh, upward. That is called Urdhvareta, or the one who's won over the tendency of the sex energy to flow outward, to completely make it flow inward. That's called Urdhvareta, by the way. Okay, for Urdhvareta, everyone becomes exactly the same. All genders, all ages, everyone becomes the same. There is no distinction per se for a person like this. So you don't have to hate women or nothing like that. It's just a thought form in the early stages. It's like when the wall is not properly built, you need to support it, right? When the wall is still being built, or when the ceiling is still being built, something like that. Something like that is what I think he is trying to say. Now, one day he said to the master that he could not allow even small girls to come near him. The master scolded him and said, "You're talking like a fool. Why should you hate women? They are the manifestations of the Divine Mother. Regard them as your own mother, and you will never feel their evil influence. The more you hate them, the more you will fall into their snares." Hari said later that these words completely changed his attitude towards women. The master knew Hari's passion for Vedanta, but he did not wish any of his disciples to become a dry ascetic or a mere bookworm. So he asked Hari to practice Vedanta in life by giving up the unreal and following the real. But it is not so easy, Sri Ramakrishna said. To realize the illusoriness of the world, study alone does not help one very much. The grace of God is required. Mere personal effort is futile. A man is a tiny creature, after all, with very limited powers, but he can achieve the impossible if he prays to God for his grace. Whereupon the master sang a song in praise of grace. Hari was profoundly moved and shed tears. Later in life, Hari achieved a wonderful synthesis of the ideals of the personal God and impersonal truth. Wow, good achieved people. Gangadhar. Gangadhar, Harinath's friend, also led the life of a strict brahmachari, eating vegetarian food cooked by his own hands and devoting himself to the study of the scriptures. He met Master in 1884 and soon became a member of his inner circle. The Master praised his ascetic habit and attributed it to the spiritual disciplines of his past life. Gangadhar became a close companion of Narendra. By the way, Narendra is the name of the boy who then in the future became Swami Vivekananda. Hari Prasanna, a college student, visited the master in the company of his friend Shashi and Sarat. Sri Ramakrishna showed him great fervor by initiating him into spiritual life. As long as he lived, Hari Prasanna remembered and observed the following drastic advice of the master. In quotes, even if a woman is as pure as gold and rolls on the ground of love of God, it is dangerous for a monk ever to look at her. So, by the way, Hari Prasanna might be one of those people. Do you see? To Hari Prasanna, the advice given was very different. Key look away from a woman, and to Harinath, he's saying, consider them as your divine mother. See, he's giving different advices to different people. Now, if you're somebody who's good in doing your inner reflection, which means if you do um, your you study yourself, you realize your faults, your weaknesses. If you know level one and level two, if you've done level one, level two, you can use the format of understanding meditation, and you can actually structure out your thinking on certain subjects of your own self, and eventually come to right conclusions. So what kind of character do you actually have to build in so and so situation? For example, if you have fear of women, then you're supposed to look at them as mothers and accept the love that they give you. Like, but treat them as whatever he says you should treat them as, right? If you are somebody who's filled with excessive lust, then your tendency should be to let go of lust, for example. So different vices depending upon what mindsets do you actually have. One mindset doesn't work for all. That's not possible. If you have neutral attitude towards women, nor positive, nor negative, nor nothing, then you don't need to do anything actually. You are already set firmly on the path, by the way. Kali Prasad. Kali Prasad visited the master towards the end of 1883. Given to the practice of meditation and the study of the scriptures, Kali was particularly interested in yoga, feeling the need of a guru in spiritual life. He came to to the master and was accepted as a disciple. The young boy possessed a rational mind and often felt skeptical about the personal God. The master said to him, "Your doubts will soon disappear. Others too have passed through such a state of mind. Look at Naren. He now weeps at the name of Radha and Krishna." Kali began to see visions of gods and goddesses. Very soon these disappeared, and the meditation he experienced vastness, infinity, and the other attributes of the impersonal Brahman. Subodh. Subodh visited the master in 1885. At the very first meeting, Sri Ramakrishna said to him, "You will succeed. Mother says so. Those whom she sends here will certainly attain spirituality." During the second meeting, the master wrote something on Subodh's tongue, stroked his body from navel to the throat, and said, "Awake, mother, awake." He asked the boy to meditate. At once, Subodh's latent spirituality was awakened. He felt a current rushing along his spinal column to the brain. Joy filled his soul. Probably the Kundalini was awakened, most likely. Sharda and Tulsi. Two more young men, Sharda Prasanna and Tulsi, complete with small band of master's disciples later to embrace the life of wandering monk. With the exception of the elder Gopal, all of them were in their teens or slightly over. They came from middle class Bengali families, and most of them were students in college or school. Their parents and relatives had envisaged for them bright worldly careers. They came to Sri Ramakrishna with pure bodies, virtuous minds, and uncontaminated souls. All were born with unusual spiritual attributes. Sri Ramakrishna accepted them even at the first sight as his children, relatives, friends, and companions. His magic touch unfolded them, and later each, according to his measure, reflected the life of the Master, becoming a torchbearer of his message across land and sea. Wow. Women devotees. With his women devotees, Sri Ramakrishna established a very sweet relationship. He himself embodied the tender traits of a woman. He had dwelt on the highest plane of truth, where there is not even the slightest trace of sex, and his innate purity evoked only the noblest emotion in men and women alike. His women devotees often said, "We seldom looked on Sri Ramakrishna as a member of the male sex. We regarded him as one of us. We never felt any constraint before him. He was our best confidant." They loved him as their child, their friend, and their teacher. In spiritual discipline, he advised them to renounce lust and greed and especially warned them not to fall into the snares of men. Wow, this is amazing. See, renounce lust, renounce greed, and especially warn them not to fall into the snares of men. Gopalma, unsurpassed among the women devotees of Master in the richness of her devotion and spiritual experiences, was Aghoramani Devi, an orthodox Brahmin woman, widowed at an early age, she dedicated herself completely to spiritual pursuits. Gopala, the baby Krishna, was an ideal deity whom he worshipped following the Vatsalya attitude of the Vaishnava religion, regarding him as her own child. Through him, she satisfied her unassuaged maternal love, cooking for him, feeding him, bathing him, and putting him to bed. This sweet intimacy with Gopala won her the sobriquet of Gopal Ma or Gopala's mother. For 40 years, she had lived on the bank of Ganges in a small bare room, her only companions being a threadbare copy of the Ramayana and a bag containing her rosary. At the age of 60, in 1884, she visited Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar. During the second visit, as soon as the master saw her, he said, "Oh, you have come. Give me something to eat." With great hesitation, she gave him some ordinary sweets that she had purchased for him on the way. The master ate them with relish and asked her to bring him simple curries or sweets prepared by her own hands. Gopal Ma thought him a queer kind of monk, for instead of talking of God, he always asked for food. She did not want to visit him again, but an irresistible attraction brought her back to the temple garden. She carried with her some simple curries that she had cooked herself. One early morning at 3 o'clock, about a year later, Gopal Ma was about to finish her daily devotions when she was startled to find Sri Ramakrishna sitting on her left, with his right hand clenched, like the hand of the image of Gopala. She was amazed and caught hold of the hand, whereupon the figure vanished and in its place appeared the real Gopala, her ideal deity. She cried aloud with joy. Gopala begged her for butter. She pleaded her poverty and gave him some dry coconut candies. Gopala sat on her lap, snatched away her rosary, jumped on her shoulders, and moved all about the room. As soon as the day broke, she hastened to Dakshineshwar like an insane woman. Of course, Gopala accompanied her, resting his head on her shoulder. She clearly saw his tiny, ruddy feet hanging over her breast. She entered Sri Ramakrishna's room. The master had fallen into samadhi like a child. He sat on her lap and she began to feed him with butter, cream, and other delicacies. After some time, he regained consciousness and returned to his bed. But the mind of Gopala's mother was still roaming in another plane. She was steeped in bliss. She saw Gopala frequently entering the master's body and again coming out of it. When she returned to her hut, still in dazed condition, Gopala accompanied her. She spent about 2 months in uninterrupted communion with God, the baby Gopala never leaving her for a moment. Then the intensity of her vision was lessened. Had it not been, her body would have perished. The Master spoke highly of her exalted spiritual condition and said that such vision of God was a rare thing for ordinary mortals. The fun loving Master one day confronted the critical Narendranath with this simple minded woman. No two could have presented a more striking contrast. The master knew of Naren's lofty contempt for all visions, and he asked the old lady to narrate her experiences to Narendra. With great hesitation, she told him her story. Now and then she interrupted her maternal chatter to ask Narendra, "My son, I am a poor, ignorant woman. I don't understand anything. You are so learned. Now tell me if these visions of Gopala are true." As Narendra listened to the story, he was profoundly moved. He said, "Yes, mother, they are quite true." Behind the cynicism, Narendra also, or too, possessed a heart full of love and tenderness. The march of events. In 1882, Hriday was dismissed from service in the Kali temple for an act of indiscretion and was ordered by the authorities never again to enter the garden. In a way, the hand of the Divine Mother may be seen even in this. Having taken care of Sri Ramakrishna during the stormy days of his spiritual discipline, Hriday had come naturally to consider himself the sole guardian of his uncle. None could approach the master without his knowledge, and he would be extremely jealous if Sri Ramakrishna had paid attention to anybody else. Hriday's removal made it possible for the real devotees of the master to approach him freely and live with him in the temple garden. During the weekends, the householders, enjoying a respite from their office duties, visited the master. The meetings on Sunday afternoons were of the nature of little festivals. Refreshments were often served. Professional musicians now and then sang devotional songs. The master and the devotees sang and danced. Sri Ramakrishna frequently going into ecstatic moods. The happy memory of such a Sunday would linger long in the minds of the devotees. Those whom the master wanted for special instruction, he would ask to visit him on Tuesdays and Saturdays. These days were particularly auspicious for the worship of Kali. The young disciples destined to be monks, Sri Ramakrishna invited on weekdays. See, the young disciples who were destined to be monks, Sri Ramakrishna invited them on weekdays when the householders were not present. The training of the householders and of the future monks had to proceed along entirely different lines. Since M means Mahendranath, generally visited the master on weekends, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna does not contain much mention of the future monastic disciples. Finally, there was a handful of fortunate disciples, householders, as well as youngsters, who were privileged to spend nights with the master in his room. They would see him get up early in the morning and walk up and down the room, singing in his sweet voice and tenderly communing with the mother. Injury to master's arm. One day in January 1884, the master was going towards a pine grove when he went into a trance. He was alone and there was no one to support him or guide his footsteps. He fell to the ground and dislocated a bone in his left arm. This accident had a significant influence on his mind, the natural inclination of which was to soar above the consciousness of the body. The acute pain, even in the arm, forced his mind to dwell on the body and on the world outside. But he saw even in this a divine purpose. For with his mind compelled to dwell on the physical plane, he realized more than ever that he was an instrument in the hands of the Divine Mother, who had a mission to fulfill through his human body and mind. He also distinctly found that in the phenomenal world of God manifests himself in an inscrutable way through diverse human beings, both good and evil. Thus, he would speak of God in the guise of the wicked, God in the guise of the pious, God in the guise of hypocrite, God in the guise of the lewd. He began to take a special delight in watching the divine play at the relative world. in the relative world. Sometimes a sweet human relationship with God would appear to him more appealing than the all-efficacing knowledge of Brahman. Many a time he would pray, Mother, don't make me unconscious through the knowledge of Brahman. Don't give me Brahma Jnana. Mother, am I not your child and naturally timid? I must have my mother. A million salutations to the knowledge of Brahman. Give it to those who want it. Again he prayed, O mother, let me remain in contact with men. Don't make me a dried up ascetic. I want to enjoy your sport in the world. He was able to taste this very rich divine experience and enjoy the love of God and company of his devotees because his mind, on account of the injury to his arm, was forced to come down to the consciousness of the body. Again, he would make fun of people who proclaimed him as a divine incarnation by pointing to his broken arm. He would say, Have you ever heard of God breaking his arm? It took arm about 5 months to heal. Ah, wow. Beginning of his illness. By the way, I think Sri Ramakrishna had cancer, if I'm not wrong, in April, throat cancer. In April 1885, the master's throat became inflamed. Prolonged conversation or absorption in samadhi, making the blood flow to the throat, would aggravate the pain. Yet, when the annual Vaishnava festival was celebrated at Panihati, Sri Ramakrishna attended it against the doctor's advice. With a group of disciples, he spent himself in music, dance, and ecstasy. The illness took a turn for the worse and was diagnosed as clergyman's sore throat. The patient was cautioned against conversations and ecstasies. Though he followed the physician's directions regarding medicine and diet, he could neither control his trances nor withhold from seekers a solace of his advice. Sometimes, like a sulky child, he would complain to the mother about the crowds who gave him no rest day or night. He was overheard to say to her, Why do you bring here all these worthless people who are like milk diluted with 5 times on its own quantity of water? My eyes are almost destroyed with blowing the fire to dry up the water. My health is gone. It is beyond my strength. Do it yourself if you want it done. This, pointed to his own body, is but a perforated drum, and if you want to go on beating it day in and day out, how long will it last? But his large heart never turned anyone away. He said, Let me be condemned to be born over and over again, even in the form of a dog, if I can be of help to a single soul. And he bore the pain, singing cheerfully, Let the body be preoccupied with illness, but, O mind, dwell forever in God's bliss. Wow. See, let the body be occupied with illness, but, O mind, dwell forever in God's bliss. One night he had a hemorrhage in the throat. The doctor now diagnosed the illness as cancer. Narendra was the first to break this heart-rending news to the disciples. Within 3 days, the master was removed to Calcutta, removed, not removed, removed to Calcutta for better treatment. At Balaram's house, he remained a week until a suitable place could be found at Shampukur in the northern section of Calcutta. During this week, he dedicated himself practically without respite to the instruction of those beloved devotees who had been unable to visit him oftener at Dakshineshwar. Discourses discourses incessantly followed from his tongue, and he often went into samadhi. Dr. Mahendra Sarkar, the celebrated homeopath of Calcutta, was invited to undertake his treatment. So, a homeopath, see, Shampukur. In the beginning of September 1885, Sri Ramakrishna was moved to Shampukur. Here, Narendra organized the young disciples to attend the master day and night. At first, they concealed the master's illness from their guardians, but when it became more serious, they remained with him almost constantly, sweeping aside the objections of their relatives and devoting themselves wholeheartedly to the nursing of their beloved Guru. These young men, under the watchful eyes of the master and the leadership of Narendra, became the Antaranga Bhaktas, the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna's inner circle. Antaranga is inner circle. They were privileged to witness many manifestations of the master's divine powers. Narendra received instructions regarding the propagation of his message after his death. The Holy Mother, so Sharda Devi, had come to be affectionately known as by Sri Ramakrishna's devotees, was brought from Dakshineshwar to look after the general cooking and to prepare the special diet of the patient. The dwelling space being extremely limited, he had to adapt herself to cramped conditions. At 3 o'clock in the morning, she would finish her bath in the Ganges and then enter a small covered place on the roof, where she spent the whole day cooking and praying. After 11 at night, when the visitors went away, she would come down to her small bedroom on the first floor to enjoy a few hours of sleep. Thus she spent 3 months working hard, sleeping little, and praying constantly for the master's recovery. At Shampukur, the devotees led an intense life. Their attendance on the master was in itself a form of spiritual discipline. His mind was constantly soaring to an exalted plane of consciousness. Now and then they would catch the contagion of a spiritual fervor. They sought to divine the meaning of his life of the master, whom most of them had accepted as an incarnation of God. One group, headed by Girish, with his robust optimism and great power of imagination, believed that the illness was a mere pretext to serve a deeper purpose. The Master has willed his illness in order to bring the devotees together and promote solidarity among them. As soon as this purpose was served, he would himself get rid of the disease. A second group thought that the Divine Mother, in whose hand the Master was an instrument, had brought about this illness to serve her own mysterious ends. But the young rationalists, led by Narendra, refused to ascribe a supernatural cause to a natural phenomenon. They believed that the master's body, a material thing, was subject, like all other material things, to physical laws. Growth, development, decay, and death were laws of nature to which master's body could not but respond. But though holding differing views, they all believed that it was to him alone that they must look for the attainment of their spiritual goals. In spite of the physician's efforts and their prayers and the nursing of the devotees, the illness rapidly progressed. The pain sometimes appeared to be unbearable. The master lived only on liquid food, and his frail body was becoming a mere skeleton. Yet his face always radiated joy, and he continued to welcome the visitors pouring in to receive his blessing. When certain zealous devotees tried to keep the visitors away, they were told by Girish, "You cannot succeed in it. He has been born for this very purpose, to sacrifice himself for the temptation for the redemption of others." The more the body was devastated by illness, the more it became the habitation of the divine spirit. Through its transparency, the god and the goddesses began to shine with ever increasing luminosity. On the day of the Kali Puja, the devotees clearly saw in him the manifestation of the Divine Mother. It was noticed at this time that some of the devotees were making an unbridled display of their emotions. A number of them, particularly among the householders, began to cultivate though at first unconsciously, the art of shedding tears, shaking the body, contorting the face, and going into trances, attempting thereby to imitate the master. They began openly to declare Sri Ramakrishna a divine incarnation and to regard themselves as his chosen people who could neglect religious disciplines with impunity. Narendra's penetrating eye soon sized up the situation. He found out that some of these external manifestations were being carefully practiced at home, while some were the outcome of malnutrition, mental weakness, or nervous debility. He mercilessly exposed the devotees who were pretending to have visions and asked all to develop a healthy religious spirit. Narendra sang inspiring songs for the younger devotees, read with them the imitation of the Christ and the Gita, and held before them the positive ideals of spirituality. Last days at Kosipur. When Sri Ramakrishna's illness showed signs of aggravation, the devotees, following the advice of Dr. Sarkar, rented a spacious garden house at Kosipur in the northern suburbs of Calcutta. The master was removed to this place on December 11th, 1885. It was at Kosipur that the curtain fell on the varied activities of the master's life on the physical plane. His soul lingered in the body 8 months more. It was a period of his great passion, a constant crucifixion of the body, and the triumphant revelation of the soul. Here one sees the humanity and divinity of the Master passing and repassing across a thin borderline. Every minute of those 8 months was suffused with touching tenderness of heart and breathtaking elevation of spirit. Every word he uttered was full of pathos and sublimity. It took the group only a few days to become adjusted to the new environment. The Holy Mother, assisted by Sri Ramakrishna's niece Lakshmi Devi and a few women devotees, took charge of the cooking for the master and his attendants. Surendra willingly bore the major portion of the expenses, and other householders contributing according to their means. 12 disciples were constant attendants of the master: Narendra, Rahal, Baburam, Niranjan, Jogin, Latu, Tarak, the elder Gopal, Kali, Shashi, Sarath, and the younger Gopal. Sharda, Harish, Hari, Gangadhar, and Tulsi visited the master from time to time and practiced sadhana at home. Narendra, preparing for his law examination, brought his books to the garden house in order to continue his studies during their infrequent spare moments. He encouraged his brother disciples to intensify their meditation, scriptural studies, and other spiritual disciplines. They all forgot their relatives and worldly duties. Among the attendants, Shashi was the embodiment of service. He did not practice in meditation, japa, or any other disciplines followed by his brother devotees. He was convinced that service to the Guru was the only religion for him. He forgot food and rest and was ever ready at Master's bedside. Pandit Shashadhar one day suggested to the Master that the latter could remove the illness by concentrating his mind on the throat. The scriptures having declared that yogis had power to cure themselves in that way. The master rebuked the Pandit. For a scholar like you to make such a proposal, how can I withdraw the mind from the lotus feet of God and turn it into this worthless cage of flesh and blood? For our sake, at least, begged Narendra and the other disciples. But Sri Ramakrishna replied, do you think I'm enjoying this suffering? I wish to recover, but that depends on the mother. Narendra, then please pray to her. She must listen to you, Master. But I cannot pray for my own body. Narendra, you must do it for our sake at least. Master, very well, I shall try. Few hours later, the master said to Narendra, I said to her, Mother, I cannot swallow food because of my pain. Make it possible for me to eat a little. She pointed you all out to me and said, What? You are eating enough through all these mouths. Isn't that so? I was ashamed and could not utter another word. This dashed all the hopes of devotees for the master's recovery. Wow, ऐसा भी होता है क्या? Fancy stuff, no? My God. I shall make the whole thing public before I go, the master said. The master had said some time before. On January 1st, 1886, he felt better and came down to the garden for a little stroll. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Some 30 lay disciples were in the hall for sitting about under the trees. Sri Ramakrishna said to Girish, Well, Girish, what have you, by the way, it's January 1st, huh? What have you seen in me that you proclaim me before everybody as an incarnation of God? Girish was not the man to be taken by surprise. He knelt before the master and said with folded hands, What an insignificant person like myself can say about the one whose glory even sages like Vyasa and Valmiki could not adequately measure. The master was profoundly moved. He said, What more shall I say? I bless you all. Be illumined. He fell into a spiritual mood. Hearing these words, the devotees, one and all, became overwhelmed with emotion. They rushed to him and each fell at his feet. He touched them all, and each received an appropriate benediction. Each of them, at the touch of the Master, experienced ineffable bliss. Some laughed, some wept, some sat down to meditate, some began to pray, some saw light, some had visions of their chosen ideals, and some felt within their bodies the rush of spiritual power. Narendra, consumed with a terrific fever for realization, complained to the master that all the others had attained peace and that he alone was dissatisfied. The master asked what he wanted. Narendra begged for samadhi, so that he might altogether forget the world for 3 or 4 days at a time. You are a fool, the master rebuked him. There is a state even higher than that. Isn't it who you sing? All that exists art thou. First of all, settle your family affairs and then come to me. You will experience a state even higher than samadhi. The master did not hide the fact that he wished to make Narendra his spiritual heir. Narendra was to continue the work after Sri Ramakrishna's passing. Sri Ramakrishna said to him, I leave these young men in your charge. See that the boys develop their spirituality and do not return home. One day he asked the boys, in preparation for a monastic life, to beg their food from door to door without thought of caste. They hailed the master's order and went out with begging bowls. A few days later, he gave the ochre cloth of sannyasi to each of them, including Girish, who was now second to none in his spirit of renunciation. Thus, the master himself laid the foundation of the future Ramakrishna orders of monks. Sri Ramakrishna was sinking day by day. His diet was reduced to a minimum and he found it almost impossible to swallow. He whispered to M, I am bearing all this cheerfully, for, for otherwise you would be weeping. If you all say that it's better that the body should go rather than suffer this torture, I am willing. The next morning he said to his depressed disciples seated near the bed, Do you know what I see? I see that God alone has become everything. Men and animals are only frameworks covered with skin, and it is He who is moving through their heads and limbs. I see that it is God Himself who has become the block, the executioner, and the victim for the sacrifice. He fainted with emotion, regaining partial consciousness. He said, Now I have no pain. I am very well. Looking at Latu, he said, There sits Latu, resting his head on the palm of his hand. To me, it is the Lord who is seated in that posture. The words were tender and touching. Like a mother, he caressed Narendra and Rachel, silently stroking their faces. He said in a half whisper to M, had this body been allowed to last a little longer, many more souls would have been illumined. He paused a moment and then said, but Mother has ordained otherwise. She will take me away otherwise, finding me guileless and foolish. People should take advantage of me and persuade me to bestow to them the rare gift of spirituality. A few minutes later, he touched his chest and said, here are two beings. One is she, and the other is her devotee. It is the latter who broke his arm, and it is he again who is now ill. Do you understand me? After a pause, he added, alas, to whom am I telling this? You, who will understand me? Pain, he consoled them again, is unavoidable as long as there is body. Lord takes on the body for the sake of his devotees. The remaining, I think we'll read next time. The book is getting very, very interesting. And, you know, something amazing may come out. Now let's do a closing prayer. So the Supreme God, Divine Father, Divine Mother, thank you for your great blessings. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. To our great spiritual teacher, to all the great spiritual teachers, to all the great gods and goddesses, to all the great, great ones, we incredibly humbly thank you for your great blessings. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Take care. See you next Saturday morning. Bye bye. God bless all of you. Have fun.